together, and we would talk about it and we would share ideas. And after there'd been some discussion, at some point I'd go, okay, now that we've spoken about this, are we happy that we can go ahead with X? And if I look back at those experiences, whenever I did that, I was never actually happy with the outcome. So either everybody would nod and say yes, but if I looked at their faces, I could see visually that somebody was saying yes, but not looking like a yes. Or on the opposite, either we were having a discussion about the proposal, it seemed like we were all aligned, and then when it came to actually saying, are we going to go ahead with this, somebody would vote and say no, and you'd be like, where'd that come from? Didn't really get that. So the reality is, it wasn't until I came across this book. So this is a book called The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. It's one of the most verbose titles you will come across, but there's absolute gold in this book. So the guy who put this book together is a guy called Sam Kano, and he doesn't come from a software background at all. He comes from a background where you have two countries going to war and they're now talking about peace agreements, very diverse backgrounds, and he works with them to try and get to an agreement. So he developed these models and these tools to work in groups that see the world very, very differently. And so one of the tools that he speaks about is this thing called gradients of agreement. It's really very simple, but I believe it's really effective. And if you're interested in kind of getting more effective at diversity, I'd really recommend you read Sam's book. And with that big disclaimer, like pretty much the whole of this talk I've stolen from him. So he's got YouTube videos and out of the contents of the book, so all the credit needs to go to, these are his thoughts and his ideas. But something I see a lot of value in from what I've been doing. So I want to just give you an example of what consensus agreement is not. So if I look at this picture and I said, what was wrong with this? There are a number of things that you could pick apart. I want to focus just on one specific technical dimension, and that is actually the question that's being asked, which is, is everyone okay with this, or some variation of that? So the problem with this question is it's a setup. What we're trying to do is we're setting people up to think of answering that in a yes or no. And the problem with the yes or no is the yes and the no need to do a lot of work. See, the reality is that yes and no is not a binary thing. We think it is, but it's actually a scalar thing. Yes could mean, yes, I love it. If we do this thing, I'm going to come and work after hours and come in on the weekends. I love it that much. Or yes could mean, okay, if we have to do it, I'll do it. And it's the same with no. No could mean, I hate this. If we go ahead with this, I'm going to start circulating my CV and looking for work elsewhere. Or no could mean, I don't really quite understand where you're coming from. Can we just talk about it a little more to get that understanding? And so what you find is the mechanics of the language and the way that we actually ask questions can present a barrier to us being effective in our interactions. So how do we get around that? How do we get around the yes or no challenge? So this is an example of gradients of agreement. This is a tool that Sam puts together. And the first thing you'll notice about it is that there is a scale. And when the facilitator asks, how do you feel about a proposal, the people participating are able to represent a lot closer to how they actually feel, other than it just being a yes or no. The important thing with gradients of agreement, it looks so simple, and yet it's so powerful. And if I look at when I've been involved in teams, like I always make that mistake. Like, can we do this? It's not the right question to ask. So what Sam suggests, he has a variation of the gradients of agreement. He suggests you adjust it to suit your team or your cultural or your organizational needs. In fact, he encourages that, and you'll see lots of different variations out there. The one thing that he does say is if you do adjust it, if you adjust the scale, just make sure you don't go below 5. So research has shown as soon as you go below 5 on the scale, you're not adequately able to represent the differences that people have in opinions. So 5's really important. So we're going to do a bit of a practice. We have a group of people. We're going to practice how gradients of agreement works. So I have a hypothetical group together, and I'm using a 6-point scale, and after a bit of discussion of proposal, I ask each person how they feel about that proposal. You're now the leader, right? So you're the dev manager or dev lead or GM or whatever. If you looked at people responding like this towards that proposal, just a couple things I want to point out. First of all, you have a consensus. So everybody's agreeing with what's being proposed. You also don't have unanimous agreement. And you may not even reach unanimous agreement based on the diversity in that group. So now with this response, how many of you as leaders would say, this proposal is great, let's go ahead with it? Any takers? I've got 1, 2, 3. Okay, there are a couple. Yeah. So it's interesting because I would say this is actually quite an enthusiastic support for a proposal. You pretty much got everybody going in the same direction. Let's compare this to another response. So same proposal, we pitch an idea and we ask the group, how do you feel about it? And we get a response like this. So you'll notice there's still nobody on the left-hand side. You've still got agreement. You have 7 people between 4 and 6. How many of you, based with this response, would go ahead with the proposal? It's a little different. Any takers? Okay. So what's interesting is if we look back at the 2, we still had everybody saying yes. Except when we bring it down to gradients, we start seeing how confident we are about that yes, and that's the power of it. What this uncovers is this uncovers meaningful conversations. So when you get a response like this, you know, okay, somebody's sitting at mixed feelings. Let's talk about what your mixed feelings are. Somebody that's sitting at, I really like it, I'm convinced. Well, maybe we don't need to focus the conversation around that. This becomes a tool for driving meaningful conversations. And that's what I really like about it. I think that this is quite a powerful idea. So when is a response like the previous one good enough? So when is it good enough? When is it okay to move ahead with a proposal when you don't have everyone totally convinced? Well, there are a couple situations that it might be applicable. If you're making a decision as a group on whether to move next week's meeting half an hour earlier, you might not need everybody to agree with enthusiastic support to move ahead with it. That may be appropriate. In fact, if I looked at the generalization, I can think of 3 general situations where not having that strong consensus would still be okay as a leader to move ahead with it. So the first would be if there's small stakes and low impact, so like moving the meeting. If you're moving the meeting, I don't need to get everybody to be 100% aligned, we can just make a call and go ahead with it. The second one would be if the people involved in the process or the people showing their response aren't necessarily impacted by the outcome. So maybe it's, we're going to make this decision that's going to impact those people. Maybe that would be fine to do. The one that I think is most applicable to our industry is when the outcome has a short lifetime. So you don't need to get a strong consensus when you have a short period of time to try with it. Now I want you to think back to small experiments with quick feedback. Who's heard that phrase before? Short experiments with quick feedback. 1 or 2 or 3. Okay. So short experiments with quick feedback is an appropriate time to, you don't necessarily need everybody to buy in 100% because the impact is short-lived. And that's why it's such an effective tool to try and get people to move ahead with an idea, as you pitch it as a short experiment. So I want to just go through the mechanics to reach closure in a consensus group. The steps are pretty simple. So first of all, you would just make sure that everybody understands that you're discussing something. Now you're going to take a step back and you're going to get a poll to see where everybody's at. And the way I'd like to do it is you just give everybody a post-it note. You make sure that the proposal of what you're putting up is visual. And that's really important. When you have a team that has diverse backgrounds, there's going to be a diversity of opinion of what they're actually agreeing to. And so making it visual is really important to get alignment on that. Give everybody a post-it note and a Sharpie, and you put the scale up and you get them all to write down their number at the same time. That's important because if you know about anchoring, as soon as somebody pitches where they're at, people might anchor themselves towards that. So you just get them to keep their number to themselves, and once everybody's represented where they sit in the gradient, you all reveal, and now you have a point to either gauge that we can go ahead with this thing or throw it back to the group for further discussion. That's kind of the process to follow. So let's see how it works. Let's say that we have leaders put through a proposal. You've had input from different people, and let's just say the stakes are small. It doesn't really matter too much. It doesn't need to be a perfect decision. You can adjust once you've actually done something and gotten real-world feedback on it. You don't know what the level of agreement is, so you put it to a poll. So in a scenario like this, it may not actually be worth discussing the idea further. You've got people strong enough to go ahead with it. In fact, the mistake I've made with some of the teams I've been in is as a leader, I've driven further discussion when it's actually the effort to get that is more draining than the impact of the decision. So talking to the team, and I can see that people are frustrated. I'm not getting 100% buy-in, so I want to talk more because I believe consensus is important, but I can see that people aren't actually, they just zoned out. As a leader, it's fine in that case just to make a call, and you can make a decision on that. So we don't call that a participatory decision. That's called a consultative process with a leader-based decision. And that can be appropriate in certain circumstances. So let's take a different scenario. So let's now say that the stakes are really high. So it's an important decision to be made. And after discussing a proposal, you bring it to the group and you get them to show where they're at. So first of all, up till that point, it's been divergent thinking. People have been going in different directions. You just want to get a quick poll to see, do we have enough alignment on this proposal to move ahead with it? So if it was an important decision and I got this type of response, this is probably not good enough. Probably not going to have a successful outcome if people are feeling this way on it. So if I saw that, what you've uncovered is you've uncovered a topic that needs to be dived in a little deeper. And as a leader or a facilitator, it's really your job to get that group to go a little deeper into it. So the group needs to prepare themselves. Sorry. Because what they're about to enter into is what Sam Kaner calls the groan zone. The groan zone is when conversations just seem to go round and round and round. People keep saying the same thing. Other people keep rebutting with the same things. It just doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere. I'm seeing a couple people smiling. I'm assuming you've experienced the groan zone. Who here has experienced the groan zone? Okay, yeah. So this is why I feel like at MYB we really need to invest in these tools and these practices because we've all gone through it. And what do you do when you're going through this without the right tools? You check out. Somebody gives up and they go, stuff it. I'm just going to agree. I'm tired of discussing it. That person's not listening. We'll never do it. We'll just go with them. That's not a great decision, right? That's not bringing diversity. That's just letting one person overpower the rest. So this is why we've got to get really good at being effective in the groan zone. And this is why I believe that this is where great software is made. If we get effective at this, We're going to make the right stuff. So, the groan zone is where you take disagreements, you uncover disagreements, and you discuss them to try and get alignment. So after some discussion, you worked your way through the groan zone, you take a poll again, and you see that there's been some movement. But there's still not enough consensus on the proposal, so you push it back for more discussion, more trying to uncover where the misalignment is, and you start to see people moving around. Continue discussing. Once you reach a point like this, you're probably at an all right stage. You're probably never going to get to everybody going to be totally convinced on the idea, because you have diversity, you have differing opinions, but this is probably a healthy enough place to make a call to move ahead with the proposal. And the pattern that you see when you start leveraging gradients of agreement is there's divergence in the beginning. Then there's this groan zone where conversations go around. And if you're really effective, if you're good at how you handle discussions, you'll start to converge on a decision. So that's a point until a decision point is made. So here, support has reached a critical mass. We can now reach closure. That is what we call a participatory process with a shared decision. The group has really made the decision, they buy into it, they're going to go ahead with it. And that's really it. That's gradients of agreements. Really, really short, very simple tool. It's something that I think if we do more, we'll get a lot better. Any questions? Anybody want to share any thoughts on it?
How do you decide that you're getting out of the groan zone and into a convergent decision?
Yeah.
Without actually causing people to just go, oh, stuff it, I'll go with the crowd.
Yeah.
You're going to find that maybe some of that is going to be people going, oh, I'll sorry.
Yeah, so I'm giving you like an ideal. This is an effective team that's really good. They're not going to give up. They're going to use the tools and practices that they have to try and find a convergent solution. It's a 130-page book that walks you through some really practical hands-on things. So some of the techniques they talk about is parking ideas, focusing on one thing, mirroring, repeating back what people are saying to try and understand their perspective. There's some cognitive empathy that comes involved. It's not an easy thing.
Yeah.
Like getting that convergence takes work and it takes practice. And I think we're a little naive in thinking that we can just throw a bunch of people into a room and they will magically get that alignment. Like that's where I see a lot of work that we still need to do. But it's probably out of the scope of this. So I'm sorry, there's no magic solution to it, but I think Sam really hits a couple of like the big points there. Any other thoughts or comments?
I think it's also good to mention that all these conversations from the groan zone does not mean that everybody's going to really like it after you've shared your discussions and have dived deeper into the conversation. You could end up having everybody realizing that they just don't like this idea.
Yeah.
So it's not biased, you're always coming up with a positive outlook to the problem, but also realization.
Yeah, so if as somebody that was facilitating something, I started to see that people were just staying here, I probably don't want to, like, it's probably not going to happen because those people are going to be implementing it and they're just not going to be bought in on it. So they're probably not going to really put their heart and soul into that work. It's probably going to fail just because they don't buy into it. I'd probably park that discussion, park that proposal, look for an alternative. If you keep it going and you're not seeing movement, people start to wear out, and at some point they're done. Don't want to be there. Yes.
It's probably a pretty good indicator of commitment. We had a discussion around this with a group. What does committed mean? And one brought up, yeah, if I say I'm not committed, doesn't mean that I'm not going to help out, but I'm not going to be the one driving it.
Yep.
So if you have a result like this, and you know the person on 6 will probably go on a sabbatical in 2 weeks' time, there might not be anyone left to drive it because no one, is really, really convinced. So this is an indicator of commitment of the group.
I
Could be.
totally agree, and this starts giving an idea of where people sit. Like the mistake I always make, it's such a technical thing. It's around the wording, and anybody that's worked with me, I'll go, does that make sense? That's a really bad question to ask, because it's a no, yes. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I do, that I'm trying to change to get more meaningful responses. So how do you feel about that? Maybe a much better question, because it gives that openness to let them gauge. Any other comments or thoughts? Great. Okay, well, thank you for coming. Thank you for spending your lunch with me. And what I would love to see you do is go and try this. Try this in your next important decisions, but also invest some time in understanding the other tools and techniques that Sam talks about getting through that groan zone. This is just going to show you that you're going into the groan zone. It's not going to actually get you through it. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Mark. So we're trying out something new for Brown Bags. We're getting people to sponsor us with some prizes and stuff that we can start giving people that are attending it. So today our prize is sponsored by Redgate. They make really cool SQL tools, and we've got a SQL compare license up for grabs. So to get this, we're going to ask a question, and today's question is, what was the name of the book which inspired Mark's book?
And you get a car.
Can I read it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can Google it. First one to get the answer gets the prize.
Facilitator Guide to Participatory Decision Making.
There you go.
That was easy.
Thanks, guys.
Cool.